How to F6F Hellcat. In Warthunder Air Realistic Battle. The Grumman F6F Hellcat was demoted to 3.3 BR in the September 2021 changes. The Hellcat shot down over 5,000 aircraft and had a 19-to-1 kill-loss ratio. Why doesn't that translate to the air realistic battle meta? Today, in Unsolved Warthunder, we find out. The Hellcat was developed as the F4U Corsair was crappy before it was awesome, and the US Navy couldn't wait for Vought to get their act together. Grumman had produced stubby little biplane fighters for the Navy in the 1930s. The Navy wanted a monoplane, so Grumman made a stubby little monoplane, which became the F4F Wildcat. These were the fighters on USN carriers when war broke out. US Navy carrier pilots were the Allied elite in 1942 and 1943. They excelled in strategy, tactics, teamwork and gunnery. Even developing the Thatch Weave, a counter to the maneuverability of the Zero. The USN held their own over the Pacific and Guadalcanal, but what they really needed was a better fighter aircraft. The Navy wanted the powerful Vought Corsair. But the Corsair had a bad habit of bouncing over arrestor wires, inopportune stalling, and was hard for pilots to see past the long nose. For insurance, the Navy asked Grumman to create a successor to the Wildcat. Grumman designed the Hellcat with one goal in mind: the best naval fighter for the Pacific theater. Landing a plane on a carrier is dangerous and hard, so Grumman put the cockpit high for visibility, which also aided gunnery. They made the Hellcat docile at low speeds, and it was built tough, as carrier operations are hard on airframes. Finally, they ensured it had long range. Grumman made the Hellcat easy to maintain. Some units had 96% operational rates. A Navy joke was that the Corsair was faster than the Hellcat 3 days a week. The rest of the time, the Corsair was down for maintenance. On the Solomons, the Hellcats had a 91% operational rate, to the Corsair's 66%. When is a joke not a joke? Grumman also made the Hellcat easy to make, with the factory in Long Island, New York churning out 12,000 F6F aircraft in just over 2 years. Which was good for the Navy. The Corsair was not approved for carrier operations until April 1944, and the US shipyards were producing carriers at an ungodly rate from 1942 onwards. The Navy commissioned 17 fleet carriers, 35 light carriers, and 67 escort carriers in this period. These new carriers needed fighters to fly off them, and Grumman had the right plane, at the right time, in the right numbers. What does all this mean for the Hellcat in Warthunder? Air Realistic is a battle royale mode with 4 phases. 1. The Scramble. 2. Is the Merge. 3. The Dogfight, and 4. The Cleanup. How does the Hellcat perform in these 4 phases? Phase 1. The Scramble. This is where planes climb as high as they can, before they meet the other team in Phase 2. The Hellcat climbs to 4 kilometers in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. In comparison, the Spitfire, 109, 0, and Yak at the same battle rating, get to that height in just over 3 minutes. In other words, these aircraft are able to get to the merge height 20% faster than the Hellcat. The best strategy for the F6F in the Scramble phase is to take off and climb at 250 km an hour indicated airspeed. Climb directly into the other team and get as high as you can before the merge. Since you will not be the highest aircraft, avoid being isolated, stick with your fellow climbing teammates. Why didn't Grumman prioritize climb rate? Carrier task forces don't scramble. If carrier fighters have to do a romantic Battle of Britain-style scramble, then the aircraft carrier is already sunk. By 1943, carrier launches were a carefully orchestrated dance of carriers, aircraft, deck operations, hangar operations, destroyer screens, destroyer recovery tasks, combat air patrols and seaplane reconnaissance. The Japanese Carrier Task Force, which attacked Midway, launched 120 planes in 15 minutes. Sounds like a scramble? It wasn't. The process started below decks at 2:30 a.m. By 3:30 a.m. the crews had aircraft up on deck. At the same time the carriers were moving into formation, sailing into the wind, so once in the air, the aircraft could form up into one strike force. Destroyers moved into place behind the carriers, to pick up any aircrew that had to ditch after takeoff. At 4:30 a.m. the aircraft were on their way to attack Midway. By 1943 the United States had added radar to their arsenal of tools. Destroyer pickets sailed far from the carriers, picking up incoming aircraft on radar. Above the pickets were combat air patrols of Hellcats, in the air all day, and after the introduction of radar to the F6F, all night too. US aircraft carriers were well defended, and there was no need to scramble fighters. Phase 2. Merging. This is where the two teams meet. This is when players decide to head on, to dive away, to go after AI targets, or are AFK and climbing in a straight line. Because of its poor climb rate, the Hellcat is usually below the point-to-point fighters. The best strategy for the merge is to dip the nose a bit, and get straight line speed to at least 350 km an hour, indicated airspeed. This speed is where the Hellcat is most comfortable maneuvering. At this point, the Spits, Yaks and BFs are above 4 km. The bombers are at 3.5 km, attackers are hitting ground targets, and the Hellcat is at 3.2 km, and watching the game unfold ahead. This is where the player has to read the game. The options are to take out a bomber that is isolated, dive on the attackers, head on a fighter at the same height, or to dive on a fighter that is the merge ball but below the Hellcat. Is doing head-ons a good strategy in the Hellcat? No. It is a low probability maneuver, however, because the Hellcat is below most fighters at the merge, F6F pilots will be doing a lot of head-ons. On the positive side, the Hellcat is tanky for a plane and can take damage in head-ons. The 650 caliber machine guns with ground target belts pack a punch when aimed in a splatter cone for the oncoming aircraft to fly into. After firing, dodge, and look for the next target. Phase 3. The Dogfight. This is where the teams turn fight in a wild melee, from merge height to the deck, deciding which team will win. The Hellcat is not a natural dogfighter, and struggles in a furball, especially when surrounded by Spitfires, Zeros, Yaks, and BFs. The Hellcat has some tricks up its sleeve though. Navy planes tend to have large surface areas for wings and flaps, aiding low-speed stability. Combined with Navy planes built tough for carrier operations, you can pop combat flaps at higher speeds than less rugged fighters. Koth. Spitfire. Koth. Combat flaps work best on the F6F under 200 km an hour in a loop. The big bad Hellcat will flip over quickly. The best maneuvering speed is between 350 and 450 km an hour. This is where the Hellcat is most comfortable turning. Due to the F6F being heavy, fat and bulky, it will wash speed quickly if turning with the nose up. Avoid this unless you are fighting in the vertical. Use loops over climbing turns. Like most American aircraft, the Hellcat responds positively in the low yo-yo. This is an energy-increasing maneuver where the Hellcat can use its big radial, its weight and the large wing area to cut under an opponent. Boom and zoom tactics in the Hellcat can be difficult as the plane experiences compression above 550 km an hour. Compression means the flying surfaces do not fully respond under the weight of the air traveling over them. This makes guns on target in a high-speed boom hard. Where a P-51 Mustang will happily boom at 700 km an hour, the Hellcat will compress and miss its firing opportunity. The high-speed dive is good for getting away from opponents though, the Hellcat will not rip its wings until 800 km an hour. A high terminal speed that is easy to avoid. Womp, womp. Phase 4. The cleanup. This is the final phase of the game, where the last couple of aircraft left on the opposing team is returning to base, or a bomber is climbing to space. American aircraft are great at ground pounding, and the Hellcat is no exception. To bleed tickets, use the ground target belts to destroy pillboxes, and other flashing ground targets. Hellcats are at their most useful during the cleanup. Phase 5. There is no Phase 5.